He warned them, over and over again. But no one listened. And when the smoke cleared, and Japan's cities were reduced to rubble, the irony was brutal. Because the man who planned the attack that launched the Pacific War was the same man who said it would all end in flames. Admiral Yamamoto wasn't just another military figurehead swept up in the fever of imperial ambition. He was something else entirely, a man who knew better, a man who had lived in the heart of the country Japan would soon provoke.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
A man who understood on a mathematical, industrial, and painfully strategic level just how bad this war would go. And still, he had to lead it. Long before Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto had walked the streets of Boston. He had studied at Harvard. He traveled across the American Midwest, through oil fields, factories, and ports, quietly observing a sleeping giant with terrifying potential. Unlike many of his fellow Japanese leaders, he didn't underestimate America. He saw what it was capable of, and he realized exactly what Japan would be up against in a prolonged war. Years before the first bombs dropped, Yamamoto had already run the numbers, and they didn't lie. In the early 1900s, Japan was expanding rapidly militarily, politically, and ideologically. The empire was riding a wave of victory and pride, convinced it could take on any world power. But Yamamoto wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid. His time in America gave him a different perspective, and a sobering one. He had studied English, mingled with American elites, and more importantly, he'd seen the sheer scale of American industry. The car plants, the oil refineries, the shipyards churning out steel behemoths at record speed. He saw the infrastructure, the resources, and the attitude, a kind of relentless confidence rooted in material power. To Yamamoto, war wasn't just about strategy and bravery, it was about logistics. Oil, ships, aircraft, steel, innovation. And when he looked at Japan's dwindling resources and compared them to America's seemingly endless supply, the conclusion was obvious. Japan could not win a long war with the United States. He wasn't guessing. He was calculating. Yamamoto knew that Japan's industrial base was a fraction of America's. The US could outproduce Japan 10 to 1, maybe more. Planes, tanks, ships. America had the factories and fuel to mass produce them with dizzying speed. And oil. That was the heart of it all. Japan had barely any. America was swimming in it. Planet. And he did. Despite his opposition, Yamamoto became the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, a tactical masterstroke designed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and buy Japan time to dominate the region. On paper, it worked. The attack on December 7, 1941, was a shock to the American public and a temporary blow to U.S. naval power. But Yamamoto knew better than to celebrate. He understood that all Pearl Harbor did was wake up the machine. It didn't destroy America's aircraft carriers. It didn't touch the country's vast oil supply. And it certainly didn't stop U.S. industry from shifting into overdrive. If anything, it ensured that the full weight of that industrial power would now be aimed squarely at Japan. The same factories he toured as a student were now working around the clock to build the planes and ships that would hunt him down. Back in Japan, his warnings were still largely ignored. Political and military leaders clung to the fantasy of fast victory. But the truth unfolded exactly as he had predicted. After 6 months of early Japanese gains, the tide turned. The United States unleashed a wave of production unlike anything the world had seen. Aircraft rolled off assembly lines like toys. Ships were built faster than Japan could sink them. New technologies like radar and long-range bombers erased any advantage Japan thought it had. By 1943, Japan was on the defensive. The empire was shrinking. And Yamamoto, still deeply respected, was flying across the Pacific to rally troops and boost morale. That's when the final irony hit. American intelligence intercepted the flight plan. Using the very kind of technological and industrial edge Yamamoto had feared, U.S. fighter planes ambushed his aircraft over Bougainville. He was killed instantly, shot down by American planes built in the factories he once toured, fueled by the oil he once saw gushing from the ground, guided by intelligence methods he had warned Japan couldn't match. It was the tragic, poetic end to a man who had tried to stop the war before it began. Yamamoto's death wasn't just a military blow, it was symbolic. It proved his prophecy in the most brutal way. Japan hadn't just lost a brilliant strategist. It had lost the man who understood the war's outcome long before it began. Because while others saw honor and glory, Yamamoto saw reality. He believed in empirical truth, what could be seen, measured, and proven.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
He knew that no amount of willpower or nationalism could overcome the cold math of war production. And he was right. The war dragged on, and Japan's losses mounted. Cities burned. Supplies vanished. Morale collapsed. By the time of surrender in 1945, Japan was a devastated shell of its former self, just as Yamamoto had foreseen. His story stands as one of the clearest examples in history of what happens when expertise is ignored. When leaders chase fantasies instead of listening to the people who know. His warnings weren't vague. They were specific, data-driven, and prescient. But they went unheeded. Yamamoto wasn't a pacifist. He wasn't soft. He was a realist. And in the brutal logic of modern warfare, he saw the truth. Victory doesn't go to the boldest. It goes to the most prepared. To the nation with the most oil, the best factories, the sharpest engineers. To the one that can keep building long after the battle begins. And in that equation, Japan never stood a chance. The legacy of Admiral Yamamoto isn't just about war. It's about the importance of knowledge, the power of observation, the danger of ignoring those who see what others don't want to see. He's a reminder that foresight, no matter how clear, is meaningless if those in charge refuse to listen. His life is a tragedy of intellect versus ideology, of data versus delusion. And in the end, it wasn't just his enemies who defeated him. It was his own side's refusal to believe the truth he laid bare. If you found this story as fascinating and frustrating as we did, let us know in the comments. Do you think Yamamoto could have changed history if his warnings had been taken seriously? Like the video, share it with someone who still thinks Pearl Harbor was a strategic win, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that changed history when ego, ambition, and blind faith collided with brutal reality. Let's take a moment to really sit with the weight of this story. Because Yamamoto's legacy isn't just some footnote in a history textbook. It's a chilling, real-life case study of what happens when someone at the top knows the truth and still has to carry out a plan that defies everything they believe in. The idea that Yamamoto, Harvard-educated, widely traveled, painfully aware of America's power, was forced to not only fight in the war he warned against, but lead the very operation that would kick it off. That's not just tragic. That's straight-up Shakespearean. He was a man trapped by duty. The same loyalty that kept him respected in Japan's military circles also shackled him to decisions he privately disagreed with. He told the Japanese high command in no uncertain terms, "In the first 6 months to a year of war with the United States and Britain, I will run wild and win victory upon victory. But then, if the war continues after that, I have no expectation of success." They heard him. They still didn't care. The war hawks in Tokyo wanted action. They believed in the mythology of Japanese superiority, in the divine winds of victory. Yamamoto believed in fuel consumption rates and steel tonnage. It wasn't exactly a fair debate. And the thing is, Yamamoto wasn't being defeatist, he was being honest. He saw war not as a romantic crusade, but as a math problem. If one side can produce 10 ships for every one the other side builds, it's not hard to figure out who's going to win. If one country has miles of oil reserves and the other is running on fumes, you don't need divine intervention, you need logistics. But Yamamoto's realism was no match for Japan's imperial fantasy, so Pearl Harbor was greenlit. And while the world reeled from the surprise attack, Yamamoto knew exactly what had been set in motion. He didn't celebrate, he didn't gloat. If anything, he mourned. Because even in the wake of Japan's greatest naval triumph, he understood what the rest of the country refused to see. They had poked the beast, and that beast had bigger guns, better planes, and factories that didn't sleep. Back in Washington, Pearl Harbor was a unifying moment. A stunned, grieving nation turned rage into productivity almost overnight. The American industrial engine roared to life. Overnight, car factories were retooled to build bombers. Housewives became riveters. Materials science accelerated. Radar, sonar, long-range bombers, aircraft carriers. America wasn't just reacting, it was innovating. And Yamamoto saw the writing on the wall. Every new American aircraft that soared over the Pacific was proof that his worst fears were coming true. Japan couldn't keep up. It didn't have the infrastructure to keep up. Even the Japanese Navy, which had started the war with an advantage in carrier strategy and pilot training, quickly found itself outpaced. The US didn't just replace losses, it expanded. Every plane Japan shot down was replaced by 2 more. Every ship sunk led to 5 more built. It was like trying to stop a flood with a teacup. And then came Midway, a turning point that proved Yamamoto's 6-month timeline wasn't a guess, it was prophecy. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan suffered a crushing defeat at Midway. 4 aircraft carriers lost, thousands of trained personnel gone. From that point forward, Japan was on the back foot. And Yamamoto, he stayed the course, because that's what soldiers do, even when they know the battle is already lost. But he didn't sugarcoat anything. He wasn't like other military leaders feeding the public empty optimism. He kept warning those above him that Japan's situation was untenable, that unless something drastic changed, defeat was inevitable. And still, they didn't listen. By 1943, Yamamoto's travels across the Pacific weren't about strategic planning anymore. They were morale tour. He knew the tide had turned. He was just trying to keep the troops from losing hope altogether. But the US had cracked Japan's codes. American intelligence intercepted his flight path. The same industrial and technological advantages Yamamoto had warned about, advanced signals intelligence, superior aircraft, faster interception planning came together to target one man. In April 1943, US P-38 Lightning fighters ambushed Yamamoto's plane in the skies over Bougainville. They knew which plane he was in. They knew when it would arrive. And they shot it out of the sky with chilling precision. It was a surgical strike, the kind of operation that only a country with massive resources, logistical mastery, and air superiority could pull off. Yamamoto's plane crashed into the jungle. He was found still seated in his chair, hand on his sword, dead on impact. And that's where the irony punches you in the gut. Because this wasn't just a man killed in action. This was a man killed by the very system he tried to warn his country about. American technology, American firepower, American intelligence. These weren't abstractions to him, they were real, and now they had ended his life. You can't write a more tragically perfect ending, but it didn't have to be this way. If Japan had heeded Yamamoto's warnings, if they'd seen past their pride and listened to hard data, they could have avoided a war they had no chance of winning. They could have spared millions of lives. Instead, they silenced the voices of reason. They dismissed the very person who knew the enemy best, and in doing so, they wrote their own downfall. What makes Yamamoto's story so painful isn't just that he was right. It's that he was powerless to change the course of history, even as he stood at its center. He wasn't a bystander. He was the one holding the steering wheel, forced to drive full speed into the wall. His tragedy isn't that he failed. It's that he succeeded, in spite of himself. Pearl Harbor was his plan, and it worked. But it only worked long enough to guarantee the backlash he feared. To this day, Yamamoto is remembered in Japan with a mix of admiration and melancholy. He was brilliant, cautious, deeply committed to his country, but he was also trapped in a system that prized loyalty over logic and pride over pragmatism. It's a pattern we've seen throughout history, experts ignored in favor of bluster, warnings dismissed until it's too late. And in Yamamoto's case, the cost was catastrophic, because war, at the end of the day, isn't won by slogans or speeches. It's won in factories, in supply chains, in the cold, hard math of who can keep producing when the other side runs out of gas. That's what Yamamoto saw. That's what he tried to make his leaders understand. And that's why his story isn't just a military tale, it's a cautionary one. It reminds us that knowledge means nothing without action, that foresight is useless in a system built on denial, and that even the most brilliant minds can be crushed under the weight of blind ambition. So next time someone tells you history is shaped by the bold, remember Admiral Yamamoto. Because he was bold, he told the truth, he took the hits, and in the end, he paid with his life, not for being wrong, but for being right. Here's the thing about Yamamoto's death: it wasn't just the end of a man. It was the moment the last thread of Japan's strategic sanity was cut. He had been the one person in the upper ranks willing to speak uncomfortable truths, the last remaining bridge between Japan's high command and a grounded understanding of the real world. And when that plane went down in 1943, so did any chance of course correction. After Yamamoto, the war effort became a slow, grinding unravel. The optimism faded. Japan doubled down on desperation. Kamikaze attacks started taking the place of coordinated strategy. Factories were bombed. Cities went dark. Rationing turned severe. Every inch of land Japan had gained in the early months of the war was now being clawed back, inch by bloody inch. And the nightmare Yamamoto predicted, a slow collapse under the weight of American industrial dominance, was in full motion. The numbers told the story. America was producing aircraft in the tens of thousands. Liberty ships were being built faster than they could be sunk. Synthetic rubber, aluminum, radar systems, and carrier groups were surging into the Pacific theater in a constant wave. And Japan was running out of metal, running out of oil, running out of time. Yamamoto had warned all of this. He'd literally said that without oil, Japan's navy was just so many useless floating shells. That was his phrasing. And by the time he was gone, that metaphor was becoming painfully literal. And yet even in death his warnings continued to echo through the chaos. There's a reason Yamamoto is still studied in military academies around the world. Not just because of Pearl Harbor, but because he was a strategist who understood the changing nature of war. He saw that modern warfare wasn't just about tactics and terrain, it was about systems, infrastructure, supply chains, scientific advancement. He knew that aircraft carriers were the future long before battleships were retired. He believed in air power, in naval aviation, in the importance of adaptability. But none of that mattered if your country didn't have the raw materials or production capacity to support it. And that's where Japan was fatally outmatched. It's easy, in hindsight, to look at Japan's decision to go to war with the United States as madness. But it didn't seem that way to everyone at the time. Japan's leadership saw themselves as warriors on a divine mission. They believed America was soft, decadent, and willing to bleed. They didn't think the US would stomach a long war. But Yamamoto knew. He had been in the lecture halls, the boardrooms, the factory floors. He had seen Americans not just in politics, but in practice. And he understood something that others didn't. That once the US committed, it wouldn't just fight, it would overwhelm. And that's what makes Yamamoto's story so haunting. He wasn't just a casualty of war. He was a casualty of truth ignored. He was a man standing in the middle of a runaway train, waving his arms, screaming at the conductor to hit the brakes. But nobody listened. And when the train finally derailed, it did so exactly where he said it would. There's a lesson in that. A brutal one. In every system, military, political, corporate, there are Yamamotos. People who see the cracks before the collapse. People who run the numbers, issue the warnings, urge caution. And more often than not, those people get sidelined, overruled, or simply ignored until it's too late. That's why his legacy matters. Not just for what he did, but for what he tried to stop. Because there's something uniquely tragic about watching a man carry out a plan he knows is doomed, and still doing it with precision, with honor, and with the quiet hope that maybe someone will finally listen. But no one did. If this story hit you the way it hit us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. Should Yamamoto have stepped away? Could anything he said have changed the outcome? Let's talk about it. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that truth doesn't scream, it warns. And when we ignore it, well, you already know how that ends. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button, it tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.